Welcome, everybody, to the DraftKings Poolside Preview Show. We are mere hours away from a crazy start to this DFS season. I'm David Kitchen, a.k.a. Socrdave. Joining me, Drew Dinkmeyer, Dinkpiece, the guy from all the commercials. Do the hand motions. Yes! Now you recognize him. And Adam Levitan. Adam is one of the newest members and does a lot of stuff with the DK Playbook. Also hosts the Edge. The Daily Fantasy Edge, is that what it's called?
The Daily Fantasy Football Edge.
Oh, it's like Ohio State.
Exactly like Ohio State.
Exactly. The Daily Football.
Without the tattoo scandal and everything like that.
So we're going to be talking really, I feel like what we've covered already with the shows, there's a lot of information out there. What, though, people are kind of wanting to know now, though, is like how is yesterday's injury report going to affect things? Because people are making a lot of lineups. We've got a $10 million tournament, and people are putting in multiple lineups, or they want to have the perfect lineup. So with a $10 million tournament and 500,000 entries in that tournament, you want to know about news. And so we'll start off with basically Devonta Freeman. And that situation, because he's one of those running backs that you didn't know if he's going to play or not, and now the story, it kind of gets a little bit muddy with yesterday's report. Adam, I'll start with you.
Yeah, Devonta Freeman's going to play in this game, and I think that makes a big difference for Tevin Coleman's outlook. I mean, everybody knows Tevin Coleman. If you played college football on DraftKings, you knew Tevin Coleman, huge play guy, huge numbers, breaking off 50-yard runs at a rate that we haven't seen. I think he can do that in the NFL, but it's not a great spot against the Eagles, so I was a little iffy on him anyways, and now we know Devonta Freeman is going to play, and we know Devonta Freeman says he's pain-free, quote-unquote. So I see that kind of as like a 1A, 1B thing. Are you getting off Tevin Coleman completely, Drew?
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a roller coaster with the news. Because coming into the week, you thought Freeman was going to play for sure. Then you got a midweek report that suggested Freeman probably wouldn't play. Now we're back to looking at Freeman in action. I'm actually keeping my exposure at where I was before. I think what happened with the roller coaster of the news is also that ownership level is going to fluctuate as well. So, you talked about it. Coleman's a big play back, a guy that, doesn't need bulk volume of touches to really pay his price tag off. So I'm still going to keep some tournament exposure. He was never on the cash game radar for me anyway.
Right, yeah, and Tevin Coleman 4,800, Doug Martin 4,500. If you wanted to get off Tevin Coleman, you could get on Doug Martin, I think. I mean, I don't love Doug Martin, but I know a lot of people do.
Yeah, and I'm one of those guys who loves Doug Martin. So I'll have some cash game exposure to Doug Martin, and I think I'll have a lot of them in tournaments as well. And I think Doug Martin's helped by some injury news as well with the Mike Evans injury situation, because I think that solidifies Doug Martin as, probably their primary red zone target if Evans is limited. I mean, maybe Evans will be in there for those red zone plays. Maybe. But I think the opportunity and the touches as a whole, when you start to shift them away from Mike Evans, the first person they go towards are Doug Martin and Vincent Jackson.
Yeah, I think the Mike Evans situation is probably the most kind of crucial situation. Like, he said that he is going to play, but you're talking about a guy who is expensive, who you're going to be spending money on, and you do not want to have a donut. I was talking earlier this week, like hamstring injuries, typically something that I like to avoid. And if you're spending up on that, you might want to spend elsewhere. And it's a situation also that if you have a few extra lineups and there's the potential that he misses, you can throw in a backup or two.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Evans is up at 7,700, and obviously Drew talked about we can go down to Vincent Jackson at 6,000 right away, save 1,700, and if Mike Evans sits, I think Vincent Jackson is a great play. I mean, every week I want to get exposure to this Tennessee secondary, which is just a total dumpster fire, and they're hurt. No Jason McCourty. Parrish Cox is questionable on their injury report, so Bleedy Reed Wilson, who is just like my DFS MVP of the year. I think you had a different nomination for last year, but for me, Bleedy Ray Wilson last year was the MVP of DFS, so I want exposure to him. I think we can get it through Vincent Jackson for 1,700 less, especially if Mike Evans is out. And, definitely more exposure for me for Vincent Jackson, even if Mike Evans plays, in case he's less than 100%.
You looking at any Austin Seferian-Jenkins on the Mike Evans news?
That's what I was about to ask.
It was such a disappointing preseason. So where are we on Austin Seferian-Jenkins?
Like, maybe he's not that good. That's really my concern. Like, maybe he can't play in the NFL. Like, this guy's 6'7". He runs really well. He's really athletic. On paper, he should dominate in the red zone. But what he showed last year in the regular season, what he showed in the preseason this year, makes me think maybe he's like a Justin Hunter type. So right now I have no Austin Seferian-Jenkins. That's probably because I have all the Jordan Reed. Like, out of every, I have all of the Jordan Reed, so I have no No Safarian Jenkins.
Yeah, Safarian Jenkins, Amaro, Ebron, like three. Like we played college football DFS a couple years ago. They were just like, it had to be one of those three guys, and they have not shown up so far. Yeah. Other injury news, though, speaking of the Lions, Joique Bell looking like he is going to play, Drew.
Yeah, so that's a situation that's been up in the air as well all week, and obviously a lot of people are excited about another college DFS player, Ameer Abdullah, that carried a lot of people that were playing college DFS to victories last year, and they want Abdullah to get those touches, but Joique Bell's got to be kind of out of the picture, at least a limited role for that to happen for Ameer Abdullah. I know we were talking before the show, you've heard some news takes that you think Abdullah is going to be on the field.
It's a hairy situation. I never know what to believe with the coaches, right? So the coaches come out and say, yeah, Joique's going to start, okay, and that's fine. He's the veteran. Joique's going to start. But in the same breath, offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi says Ameer Abdullah is going to play a ton. He's going to run the ball. He's going to play in the pass game. And I tend to believe him because Joique literally didn't practice for 8 months. Entire offseason program was rehabbing from surgery. Didn't play in a single preseason game. Missed like the first 3 weeks of training camp. And like they're just going to come back and throw him right in for 20 touches. I don't think so. So my floor projection for Ameer Abdullah is like 10 or 12. But it wouldn't surprise me if he got up to like 15 or 16 if this game goes right. So I do have some Ameer Abdullah in some big tournament spots for me.
Yeah, $4,000.
Right.
You get 15 touches at $4,000 with his kind of big play upside. That's definitely a shot worth taking.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think the floor is probably around 10 to 12 touches. They seemed in the preseason dead set on getting him involved in the offense. So he's a guy that I'm excited about. Even though Joique Bell's probably going to play, I think the news flow has been good for Ameer Abdullah throughout the week, the fact that it was even kind of questionable.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing we talk about is like the coach speak.
Yeah.
Coach speak is so like people that take it to heart, a lot of times daily fantasy get burned because it's like, well, the coach said this, and then it just does not play well at all. Talk to me a little bit, Adam, since you deal a lot with the news. Like when you see a coach like give a report, like is it something where you kind of realize some coaches are honest, more honest than others with their assessments?
Yeah, some coaches will just come out and tell you, right? But most of them won't. I mean, the one that everybody wants to talk about, anytime I tweet something that a coach says, in my mentions it says, I'm going to run him till he pukes. And obviously that was what the Bills said about C.J. Spiller, and then they went out and gave him like 8 to 10 touches, you know. Yeah, taking coaches literally is a huge mistake, I think. I think a few of them might be honest about an injury situation. For the most part, I think it's a lot of noise that will confuse us more than help us in the long run.
Yeah, one of those guys, speaking from someone who's in Tennessee, Jeff Fisher. And Jeff Fisher now with St. Louis, and they've got an interesting situation with Trey Mason.
Yeah, and so we talked about this early in the week. We knew no Todd Gurley.
Right.
We knew that was coming in. When we talked on the preview show, I said, hey, you know, Trey Mason might be the guy to pile up some touches, and now Trey Mason's not going to play. So we're looking at Benny Cunningham as the guy, and we've just taken a noticeable drop in value in terms of skill set. Each player we've gone down the depth chart. Now Cunningham, min price, that's interesting just because it's min price running back with volume, but is the upside really there against the Seattle defense?
Right, and the way you beat Seattle, I think, is running them up the gut. I mean, you're not going to be able to throw. I don't think the Rams are going to be able to throw on Seattle at all because they kind of eat up those big physical receivers like Brian Quick and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm not going to play Benny Cunningham. I just don't think he's good enough to beat the Seattle defense, but there's going to be really low ownership on him considering a guy who I would project for 12 to 15 touches at minimum price. You might get like 2% on him.
Yeah. Now, early in the week, we were talking about Vegas lines and that was potentially a trap situation that you were talking about with Seattle being a favorite on the road against a good Rams defense. Now, with all these injuries in the running back situation, and you mentioned it there, that their wide receivers don't particularly match up great with Seattle's DBs. Do you think Seattle's defense gets a boost from all this injury talk during the course of the week?
Oh, yeah. I know a lot of people are on Miami defense. If I'm going to pay up, and I think it's contrarian to pay up for defense, I'm paying up for Seattle's defense. I mean, Nick Foles, people are going to see. Nick Foles is atrocious, okay? When he was in Philly and played well, it was because of Chip Kelly. When he goes to St. Louis, it's going to be a total train wreck. And I think Seattle's defense is a great, great play because they're 3,400. They're the most expensive defense, and not a lot of people are going to be on them. So, yeah, definitely Seattle's defense for me.
And speaking of the news, staying in that game with the defense, pairing him with a guy like Lockett, who coaches have been actively saying that they want to get him involved, that sort of thing. Your take on the coach speak with Lockett?
I'm excited. It's enough that I'm going to consider using Lockett in some lineups now when he was off the radar completely, even with a really good preseason. But the quote that really got my attention was the fact that they're going to play him at all three wide receiver slots, because he's probably not going to be the starting wide receiver unless they start out with 3 wide right off the bat. But the fact that they'll play him at all 3 spots means we've got a chance at 60 to 70% snaps. And a big play, explosive guy, going to have those punt return, kick return opportunities.
Right.
I think he's interesting at 3K.
Yeah, and, Tyler Lockett can play, and a lot of people said when he came to the Seahawks he would only be a return man. Well, they didn't take him in the 3rd round to only be that would be a lot of draft capital. And then he comes out, plays really well in the preseason. And think about their wide receiver depth chart. Like, Doug Baldwin's not that good. Jermaine Kearse isn't that good. Chris Matthews has not progressed the way that they like. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for Tyler Lockett, and I love that punt returner defense correlation play. Like, I have a Manny Sanders Broncos D lineup, and maybe we've talked about that too much because I feel like that's going to be over-owned compared to its worth now. But yeah, Tyler Lockett and Seattle, I think, is another one you can do.
Yeah, doubling up on those touchdowns. Get one for the individual player, one for the team defense as well.
And I think, especially like in maybe the smaller tournaments that's in play, and even like wanting to cash, there's like different levels of like tournament players. I feel like myself, I just want to cash. Like, I just want to have a profitable season, and I want to have a profitable tournament. Others just go like completely contrarian, and they want like that top 5, top 3 prize, and so they go crazy. And I thought an interesting point that we had earlier in the week with Maka Supa, Andrew Wiggins, was the fact that like pairing might not work in a tournament with 500,000 players because you have to hit on every single position. So if you have a Tyler Lockett and the Seattle D, like, you would need that Tyler Lockett play to really go off in addition to the Seattle defense.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we talked about it with reference to the double handcuff on the quarterback situation, getting a quarterback and 2 wide receivers together. Could they do enough? And in that case, you probably need 4 touchdowns from the quarterback and probably split 2 evenly to the 2 receiving options. So Lockett's interesting because the correlation is more direct on the punt return side that I think it would work out. But you also have to say, if he doesn't return a kick for a touchdown and Tyler Lockett's having a big game, Seattle's defense probably isn't doing very well, right? Because they're probably not throwing the ball a lot if Seattle's defense is doing really well.
Yeah, I mean, all we really need is 3 punt returns for a touchdown from Tyler Lockett, and then like 3 catches for 80 yards and 2 more. Is that asking too much?
No. I mean,
that's right about right.
I could do it. All right, speaking of Lockett, myself, and other explosive guys, LaShawn McCoy. This is going to be a fun game. Your thoughts on McCoy?
Yeah, so McCoy's injury situation has kind of developed over the course of the week as well. It looks like he's going to be able to go. Probably not 100%.
That's what he says,
Probably not going to get a full workload that we're accustomed to from LaShawn McCoy, and we know Buffalo wants to run LaShawn McCoy quite a bit. So what does that do? We know you like Tyrod Taylor. Do you think that funnels some of the carries to Tyrod Taylor, or do you think immediately those carries are probably going to Carlos Williams and backup running backs?
Yeah, I mean, Rex Ryan offense, they're going to run the ball, right? So if your projection for LaShawn McCoy in an Eagles offense was like 20 to 25 touches, in a Rex Ryan offense it might be 20 to 25 carries, plus the catches. So, yeah, I think LaShawn McCoy is an interesting play because he's been hurt and nobody wants to take the Bills, and a lot of people have Tyrod, and the Colts are really exploitable up the gut, and the running quarterback like Tyrod opens up more lanes for running backs. So I think LaShawn McCoy is a really interesting tournament play. I think Buffalo wins this game. I think they play really well in this home opener. I think LaShawn McCoy will be a big part of it. The part that scares me is that he says he's less than 100%, and Carlos Williams did have a nice preseason. So definitely not a lot of exposure for LaShawn McCoy, but I do have him in 1 or 2 lineups.
What are some other wide receiver players that you think there might be some injury history or injury reports from last week on?
I mean, Alshon Jeffery is the big one. Drew can talk about this as a Chicago guy. Alshon Jeffery was able to practice all 3 days this week, which is encouraging to me. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, limited each day, and even on a wet field on Friday, Alshon Jeffery, they still let him go out there and practice. So to me, it seems like Alshon Jeffery's gonna be close to a full go, maybe 75. 80%. I don't have any of him, but I have taken Eddie Royal out of the vast majority of my lineups.
Yeah, it's an interesting pivot situation because I think a lot of people are looking at Eddie Royal at that $3,900 price tag. The rapport he's built with Jay Cutler historically going back to their days in Denver. But Alshon, it's interesting because this injury all preseason was supposed to be a short-term thing, and it's just lingered and lingered and lingered. So the Chicago media has really lost a lot of faith in John Fox, who doesn't have the most, forward injury history in terms of giving information. And some of the stats I've seen on John Fox, historically questionable players play at a below-average clip compared to the rest of the league. So it's interesting to see. And not only is Jeffery banged up, Eddie Royal's banged up as well. So if Jeffery goes, I think it is a ding to Royal and potentially Martellus Bennett. If he's out, I think Martellus Bennett and Royal are back in play in a big way.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, because I have Martellus Bennett in cash lineup. If Alshon Jeffery plays, do I get off Martellus Bennett in cash?
The price on DraftKings, $4,300.
Right.
I'm still comfortable with Martellus Bennett regardless, because I think the floor for Bennett is like 4 for 50, 4 for 60, and I think that floor for $4,300 is fine. And good red zone touchdown upside as well. So I think he's fine either way.
And it definitely seems like that takes more of the hit on Royal. And I think that's who a lot of guys were on. And he was even a cash option potentially when you are looking to save some cap space. The thing about the week 1 salaries, it's always interesting because they come out weeks in advance. Like before the preseason even starts, you've got the main salaries come out, and there is so much news like we have talked about. And you have players that when they were originally priced seemed like they were probably, all right, that's a probably good price for them. Now, like, okay, that's a good value for them. One of those guys we talked about that is like probably good value is John Brown. And Drew, I know you're a big John Brown fan, but now you got some news with Floyd.
Yeah, so Floyd had this injury in the preseason, dislocated fingers, and he's been sort of on the practice field, but I don't know if that gives us a good indication of how many snaps he'll play or if he'll play at all. I'm taking the risk on John Brown. All the reports out of training camp and in Arizona this year have been so positive on John Brown. And that Saints secondary without Keenan Lewis is very, very vulnerable. So the decision for me isn't how much John Brown you're going to have. It's going to be where you're going to allocate it. Is it going to be in tournaments? Is it going to be in cash games? For me, it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, see, I'm not on John Brown in cash. I'm not sure that he's going to get enough targets, and I think they might be a little bit deeper down the field than I like for cash, but definitely tournaments for me on John Brown. If you watch him play, like, kind of reminds you of T.Y. Hilton a little bit, maybe a little Antonio Brown, maybe a mix of the two. I mean, the kid can really play, and I know Carson Palmer loves him. I think Larry Fitzgerald is 1 foot in the grave, and we already talked about the Michael Floyd situation. So, yeah, definitely a good spot for John Brown.
And I think also you just mentioned Palmer is in a better, you put better weapons around him, he's in a better situation. I know a lot of people are already on Palmer as a potential GPP quarterback, someone that maybe people not thinking of as far as Tyrod Taylor or Rodgers or Luck. So Palmer, I think, if Floyd does in fact suit up and plays, I think it makes him a more appealing option.
And I like Palmer. The reason I like Palmer in this individual matchup is I don't know that Arizona can really run the ball in the red zone effectively. Andre Ellington's never been that guy. Chris Johnson's never been that guy.
They haven't done it in like 5 years.
So it's really down to, is David Johnson a goal line type guy? And they've mixed in like Stephon Taylor in the past. So I think they're going to have to throw to score touchdowns, which is one of the reasons that I like Carson Palmer in tournaments this week.
Yeah. Lastly, the tight end position. You got Ladarius Green, who had a lot of hype last year. This year, not as much hype, but people still wanted to see him play, still believed in him. Is there any sort of daily fantasy value here, Adam, with Ladarius Green?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know if he's going to play, right? He had this concussion. He was concussed in Wednesday's practice, was allowed to practice on Friday, but non-contact. So I haven't heard yet if he passed the protocol. We'll probably get word maybe later today, maybe tomorrow. I think the big thing for me is I'm not going to use Ladarius Green, but if he does sit, it's just more targets for Stevie Johnson, for Keenan Allen, for Danny Woodhead. The tight ends, that obviously Antonio Gates is suspended. If Ladarius Green doesn't play, also they're down to 3 guys that run like a dad, three guys that can't catch. I wouldn't be surprised if the 3 backup tight ends combined for 0 targets if Ladarius Green doesn't play, which is obviously a big thing when we're talking about target allocation.
Yeah, I think it's huge. And Ladarius was a guy that I was excited about in the preseason because there was no talk about him. Right. And I thought, you know what, this is an opportunity where we might get a really low-owned, explosive player at a position that's pretty scarce that could be tournament winning. And now, you really can't take that chance on Ladarius because we don't know what the situation is. And I agree with Adam that I think it just spreads some of those targets around. I think it's an upgrade for both Stevie Johnson and Danny Woodhead.
Yeah.
Who do you think will be the highest-owned tight end tomorrow in the Millie Maker?
I think Greg Olsen.
Yeah, I'm going to say Olsen as well, which is interesting because when you think about upside at the tight end position, I don't really think about Greg Olsen.
No.
Because he doesn't score touchdowns consistently. He's more of kind of the consistent PPR threat. But I think the situation losing Kelvin Benjamin and the matchup, Jacksonville, I think everybody assumes Jacksonville's just bad at everything, right? Because they've been a horrible football team for a few years. I think that's going to put ownership, at a reasonable price tag for Olsen at a high level.
Yeah. And just talking about the strategy of it, if Olsen does not have a good game, it's like just looking at how everything's working out, it could be the tight end that really decides, if you place high in a cash or even win that $2 million or $1 million or not, because the tight end position is definitely the one with the most question marks this week.
Yeah, and Jimmy Graham, I think, is the guy that people are not talking about, right? Like, if you look on Twitter, you look on all the articles, nobody's talking about Jimmy Graham. I think that he'll get red zone targets. I mean, if I can get Jimmy Graham, if you told me he was like 4%, I'm on Jimmy Graham in tournaments for sure.
Yeah, and that's the hard thing about the tight end position right now is trying to come up with the list of guys that can score 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Because all the tight ends that we're assessing aren't going to be guys that are going to rack up like 8 for 80, right? So they're going to have to get it through the end zone. And so the list of tight ends that could be out there and score 2 touchdowns is pretty limited. Jimmy Graham's on that list for sure. Oh, okay. Yeah. So there's the one guy.
And I'm on Delaney Walker, too. So I feel like
little hometown flavor.
And I was never a big Delaney Walker fan, but just seeing him last year. So, yeah, I think the tight end position is going to be crucial in the lineups, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But, yeah, guys, we're about to wrap up this quick preview. Again, this is the DraftKings Poolside preview show. As you can see behind us, like all sorts of DK people. I mean, I'm literally counting 3 millionaires in the pool from tournaments. Guys you see in commercials. So just all sorts of famous people doing crazy jumps in there. I feel like they're like trying to get us wet for a portion of that time. So anyways, yeah, we'll wrap it up, guys. As far as like we have the War Room here in Miami. It'll be open till 2 a.m. So people are going to be in there just making lineups, going crazy. Drew, we talked about it earlier. Like you still have some lineups to make, and then you have cash lineups. Like, what's going to be your process? You think? Do you want to? Do you have like a specific time that you want to have things done and just kind of relax tomorrow?
Yeah, I'd like to have all my lineups in place tonight so that if any news breaks, I can react to it instead of having to be building my lineups tomorrow morning and then have to adjust on the fly. So my goal is to get all my lineups allocated tonight, be able to hopefully get some sleep, wake up refreshed, and be ready to react to any news that comes in.
Adam, you too?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of putting a lot of my effort into qualifying for the live final, which may or not be a smart idea, but I'm going to get there, and it'll end up being a great idea. So I'm having a lot of my effort into the lineup that I'm trying to qualify.
Compete for your piece of $15 million.
$15 million. It's going to be interesting. 200 contestants for the DraftKings final in December, right before Christmas in Las Vegas, and then the final 10 will move on
with a certain 4-letter network broadcasting.
Yeah, so
DKTV.
So the final 10 will move on, and top prize $5 million. That's crazy because last year was $3 million.
Yeah.
So we've come a long way since then. Adam Levitan, Drew Dinkmeyer, I'm David Kitchen. This is DraftKings, and welcome to the big time. Very nice. Nice splash, Roberta.